Okay, this is our CS 1400 class and we're going to go over user-defined methods. Okay, what we want to do is we want to break our problem into smaller pieces. Rather than solve the entire problem, it's easier to code tiny little pieces of code, and that's what a method is. A method is a small segment of code that performs just a specific task. And the reason you use methods is number one, to organize your code, but you can also reuse the methods. It's easier to debug a smaller piece of code than a whole page of code. It makes your code much easier to read because you can name the pieces. Hey, this is this particular piece. And then it's also easier to code small tasks than it is to code a huge project. When you name your method, you want to define what you want your method to do. Break down your entire program, think about just the pieces you need to code, and then name the method accordingly. For example, what would you name a method that would determine the larger of two numbers? Give you a sec to think about it. No wrong answers on this one, except for the wrong answers. So here's a couple of examples. You could call it max, get larger, larger num. Notice when I do my method name, there's no spaces, and I am using camel case. If I have two words, I capitalize the second word to make it easier to read. Those would all be pretty good names for a method that would determine the larger of two numbers. Okay, the next piece of information you need to think about when you're trying to code a method is what information you need to solve the problem. That will be your parameter. Okay, so given a method named max, max finds the larger of two numbers, what information do you need in order to solve the problem and accomplish the task? Well, and what type of information would that be? Well, if you needed to solve the larger of two numbers, you would need the two numbers. And depending on what you need, what type of numbers those are, it would either be double or int. If you wanted decimals, or if you wanted whole numbers, it would be int. And so max, this method that finds the larger of two numbers, would have two parameters, one for each of those numbers. Okay, then you need to figure out what your return value is. Your return value is what information is solved by your method. So in this particular situation, here I have max with two parameters, x and y. I want to find the larger of two values. What information would be returned? What is solved? Well, in this case, it's the larger number. So if our smaller, the two numbers are two parameters or ints, we'll probably be returning back an int. And so int is going to be our return type. Okay, so here is our max method if we put it all together. We have public, int, max, int x, and int y. We say public because we want to have access to it publicly. We want to be able to call it. Pretty much all of your methods in this class are going to be public. Int means that's our return type. What information is being solved? Well, it's the larger of our two numbers. The larger of our two numbers would be an int, so that's our return type. Max is the name of our method because we want a method that finds the larger of two numbers. These are our two parameters. Those are the two pieces of information we need in order to solve the problem. Once we have that in, we can just do an if statement. If x is larger than y, we're going to return x because it's the larger number. If not, it's going to return y. The way we return our value is with the keyword return. Oh, here I went. It was faster than my PowerPoint, so now I have to click through all of my animations to show you what there is. So public gives you access outside of the class. Return type, that's not true or false. As a matter of fact, that is an int return type. Our name is something descriptive. Okay, let's do another one. Oh yeah, multiple parameters. You have multiple parameters in this one. You have an int x and an int y. You do have to separate them with a comma, and you have to put in what type of value they are for each parameter. You can't just say int x comma y. You have to say int x comma int y. Okay, a method call will allow you to use your method. So in this case, if I wanted to find the larger of two numbers, I could say int larger equals max, because that's the name of my method, and then I would send it two pieces of information for our two parameters. So that is one way to call a method. Okay, the numbers that you put up here are actual parameters or arguments. The numbers that you have in your method are your formal parameters. And they have to match. So if you have two formal parameters, you have to have two actual parameters or two arguments. Okay, here's your turn. We're going to practice one. Define what you want the function to do. I can't remember what we're doing. Write a program. This is what we're going to do for our no-brainer. We're going to write a program to determine if a sentence is a palindrome or not. What kind of methods can we have? How can we break this problem down? Okay, so define your parameters. There we go. Is palindrome. That would be a good name for a method that determines if something is a palindrome or not. What information do you need to accomplish this task? What parameters do we need? What formal parameters will we need for is palindrome? Okay, in this case we would need the sentence, whether or not the sentence was a palindrome. In order to find out if something is a palindrome, they need to give us a sentence. So that would probably be of type string. We would have one parameter. Okay, return value. What would be returned in order to solve this problem? Well, it would be either we return true, it's a palindrome, or not, that it's not a palindrome. So in this case, given a method name is palindrome, what type of value would be returned? We would probably say a Boolean value. So here's kind of an example of a Boolean value. We'll say is palindrome. We have a string parameter. Our access type is public. Our return type is Boolean because we're returning back true or false that it's a palindrome. We named it something descriptive, is palindrome. And then we have one parameter of the phrase that we're going to use to determine what's a palindrome. So here I have an example of the method call. I have string phrase equals race car. If is palindrome, that's going to call this code down here, and I send it our actual parameter, our phrase, there's our variable right there. Then it's going to print out that it's a palindrome. This actual parameter gets copied into this formal parameter here so we can do the logic. It's going to go through, read through our code. It's either going to return back true and provide a true for this if statement, or it's going to return back false and it would skip this if statement. Alright, here's this again. I can't remember what we're doing here. Write a method. Okay, let's try another parameter. Write a method that will reverse a string. So given string hello, it would return back OLLEH. Sorry, I had to think about how to spell hello backwards. Okay, what would we first of all, what would we name it? Maybe reverse string, maybe backwards text. Any of those would work. Okay, in order to reverse a string, what information would we need? Well, we'd need the string of that whatever we're reversing. So that would be, okay, so we're calling it reverse. What would be needed in order to accomplish this task? We'd need a string of the information that we're going to reverse, right? Okay, what's our return type? Well, if we're going to reverse a string, we're going to return back a string of the reversed version of our string. So a string would be our return type. So given all this put together, our method would look like this. We have public because it's always public. String is our return back type because we're returning back the reverse of whatever we're given. Reverse is the name of our method. It's something descriptive. And our parameter is a string for the phrase that we're going to have them reverse. Okay, so here's an example of our function call. We have string phrase equals race car. Backwards equals the reverse of that particular phrase. Whatever gets returned is stored into the string backwards. There's my actual parameter because it's in the function call. There is my formal parameter because it's in our method. All right, so that is the end of our methods. Come follow us along as we actually code this in the No-Brainer. We're going to actually code 3 methods into determining if a sentence is a palindrome or not.